It's Ash from Super Videos, back to talk about Season 10 of The Walking Dead. In this video, we're going to look at Season 10, Episode 13, which was Michonne's final episode, which was called What We Become. We're going to compare Michonne's final episode to Rick's final episode, and we're going to talk about which exit was done better, Rick's exit or Michonne's exit. Now, before I dive into the reasoning behind my answer to that question, based on my preferences and my own opinions, I'll tell you the short answer. I think they handled Rick's exit from the show and his quote-unquote death a lot better than they handled Michonne's open-ended exit. And I enjoyed and loved Rick's final episode a lot more, and I mean a lot more than I did with Michonne's. I know some people liked them the same. Some people thought that Rick's exit was done slightly better, but in my opinion, I think that based on everything that I'm going to go through in this video, I think Michonne's exit was not handled properly. Did they completely screw up her final episode? Absolutely not. Could it have been better? Absolutely. I think I even tweeted about this. It was good when it could have been perfect. And certain parts I actually really hated, and I just wish they didn't do some of the stuff they did. Now, before I dive into this, another thing I want to bring up, I put a poll on Twitter asking what the consensus was amongst the fandom, who liked Rick's exit better, who liked Michonne's exit better, who liked them the same, and who didn't like any of them. And I got some pretty interesting results. And obviously the poll is still open. You can go to my Twitter and participate. But up to this point, we have 31 votes. 41% think that Rick's exit was done better. 32% think it was about the same. 19% think that Michonne's exit was done better, and 6% didn't like either one of those. But with that said, let's dive into some of my reasoning. The first reasoning I have is we didn't see as much of Michonne in Season 10 as we would have liked to see. And I think this is a side effect of pushing her final exit story arc to the end of the season and having it happen in parallel to another major story that we're already in, which is the Whispers arc. See, with Rick, why his exit worked so well was because we didn't really dive into a new story arc. We just finished All Out War and we were just beginning to get into the next arc, and we weren't really deep into like a big conflict or a big story arc. So they had enough time to give us as much of Rick as we wanted. If you think about it, Rick was involved in what they did with the Saviors at that point. So we got a lot of Rick dealing with that situation. We got a lot of great Rick moments with other characters who we wanted him to interact with. Again, like Carol, Daryl, even Negan, Maggie, and all of that. And so they had all the time in the world in the first 5 episodes to make sure they give us enough of Rick so that it doesn't feel like we didn't get enough of Rick before he left. But in Michonne's case, because they pushed it till the end of the season, and because it ran in parallel with the Whispers arc, and we're obviously deep into the Whispers arc, that made it a lot more difficult. And as a result, we didn't get enough of Michonne as we would have loved to see. We didn't get a lot of scenes with Michonne and other characters who we wanted to see for the last time. Yes, Michonne and Judith had like a scene at the end, but we wanted to see a big scene, or at least a worthy scene between Michonne and Carol, Michonne and Daryl, and some of the other characters. And we didn't really get that. It felt like they didn't really have enough time to invest on Michonne. And again, this is a side effect of pushing her story to the end and having it happen in parallel to the Whispers arc. It doesn't really make it better that we're nearly at the end of the Whispers arc. So it's at a critical point in that story as well. So that's one of the reasons why I think they didn't handle Michonne's exit as good as they did with Rick, because we got less of Michonne than we wanted to see. The next reason was that most of the hallucinations that they gave us in this episode, in Michonne's final episode, were trivial. They didn't really add anything to the story. And in the next couple minutes, I'm gonna explain why I think that. Most of the hallucinations felt forced. And like I said, they felt like they were trivial. It's like they wanted to do the exact same thing they did with Rick, but this time with Michonne. But they wanted to slightly change it so that it's not like they copied Rick's arc. So they couldn't have Michonne bleeding out and hallucinating, because that's exactly what happened with Rick. And there was no other good way to make Michonne have these hallucinations than have her be drugged, have these hallucinations as she's tripping on whatever she was tripping on. So that's another part of it. Also, some of the hallucinations in Michonne's final episode felt like fan-made edits. Like, during some of those hallucinations, I was like, I can even do this myself if they give me like certain footage from Michonne that they recently just filmed. Now, some of it was good, but some of it felt forced, and I think that it just took you away from the moment because it felt like you were watching a fan edit. Also, most of the hallucinations they had were digitally altered, and they were actually old footage. And that goes back to the conversation that we had, which is that it felt like a fan edit video. And generally speaking, Rick's hallucinations were deeper, and it had like a bigger and more critical meaning behind it than just being a hallucination. But for Michonne's hallucinations, it felt trivial, and it didn't feel like it really added anything to the story and to what they were doing other than just giving us some old footage again, but having Michonne kind of dropped in the middle of it. Now on the other side, all of Rick's hallucinations, except I think the one with Shane, were actually like new footage. And what I mean by that is that they didn't use old scenes and just alter them. With Shane and Rick in the car, they obviously kind of did that because they just used the same kind of environment, even though they had both of them actually have new scenes together. They brought that kind of old scene back. But other than that, all of the other scenes that they had for Rick in terms of hallucinations were new scenes. The one with Sasha was brand new, the one with Herschel was brand new, and so on. Even the Shane one, like I said, it was brand new, but the environment was identical to a scene that we saw back in the pilot. And this gets me to my next point. They did not bring back any of the old characters for Michonne's final episode. Every character who's dead that we saw in Michonne's last episode was there from old footage and was digitally altered and added in. So it's not like the actors actually came back and filmed something new. You know what I mean? The only case they did that was with Jeffrey Dean Morgan. And in that case, obviously Negan is not dead and he's still in the story, so it doesn't really count as bringing a character back. And for the most part, like I said, they used old footage and digitally altered them. If they couldn't bring back anyone else, they needed to bring back Rick Grimes. They brought all of those characters back for Rick, so why couldn't they just bring Rick back for just a small scene even with Michonne for her last episode? Now I understand that maybe they couldn't work out the timeline and schedule with Andrew Lincoln to come back as Rick. I get all of that, but if they couldn't bring back any of those characters, I don't see a good reason why they would use old footage and pretend or make the audience think that those characters came back. You know what I mean? Even if they couldn't bring back Rick, they should have brought back another character that had a close connection to Michonne, like Andrea, Carl. I mean, they brought Andrea back by using an old footage of her, right? So they could have just had her film new scenes from that exact moment when Michonne came and saved her. So they could have done the exact same thing in a way, kind of like what they did with Shane and Rick. But have Andrea actually film those scenes again and just add new scenes here and there to make it feel fresh. And they could have even had something where Michonne and Andrea have new dialogue together, but Michonne at the end of the day leaves and doesn't save her, much like what they already did. Now I know that they actually brought Siddiq back, but that doesn't really count either, in my opinion. One, it was unnecessary, it was underwhelming, and it didn't really add anything to the story or to that moment. And also, Siddiq just left in season 10, so it doesn't quite feel the same as bringing back a character who's been long gone, who may have had a closer connection to Michonne than Siddiq did. The other thing I want to mention is some of the digitally altered scenes were too digital, if that's even a thing, and it actually took you away from the moment. For example, Michonne looking at Rick in the lineup, that was a little out of place, and it was too obvious that it was digital and that it wasn't a real scene. That was one of the moments where I'm like, this feels too much like a fan edit, you know what I mean? The other one, which wasn't really a digitally altered scene, but it was just footage that they've reused, it was the one with Andrea in the opening minutes. If you take a look, the quality of that clip is lower than the actual quality of the other clips, the new clips. So it felt too much like they just dropped that in there. And I feel like they could have done something so it's not too obvious that they're using old footage. Even the scene with Rick shooting Michonne and killing her. I absolutely love the idea of Rick showing up and killing Michonne, but that scene, when I saw it, I'm like, I know exactly where this is from. I know the exact episode this happens. And for those of you that missed it, that was actually when Rick shoots Sophia. Now they did digitally alter that scene so that Rick looks a little older, so it's consistent for season 8 timeline when this was supposed to be from, but it still felt like it was just dropped in there. And like I said, I could pinpoint where they took that from. Maybe it's just me because I was paying attention and I actually break everything apart, but I'm willing to bet there were many people who actually could identify that scene the moment they saw it. So with all of that said, generally speaking, I think her actual exit, other than the hallucination stuff, was very predictable. I mean, many fans knew right away, the moment they said Michonne was gonna exit in season 10, that she was most likely not gonna die, and that her exit was most likely gonna bring her closer to Rick. And that's exactly what they did. And I feel like the Virgil story that they had in this episode was flat and underwhelming. The only thing that Virgil was good for in this episode was to make Michonne have these hallucinations and to get Michonne to that boat. And that was it. Other than that, his story was insignificant. The other thing I want to mention is going back to the discussion about using old footage and bringing back old storylines. I feel like if the audience didn't remember some of those moments and didn't break everything apart like hardcore fans, they wouldn't have understood some of the scenes and some of it would have gone over their heads. For example, the survivor with the orange backpack. I'm pretty sure there's tons of fans who remembered that, but if you didn't remember that moment from back in season 3, then this moment felt like it was just a regular scene where the survivors didn't help Michonne. But there was more to it than that. And I felt like it probably went over a lot of fans' heads. And that's why it kind of lost some of its purpose. You know what I mean? Now, with all of that said, let me be a little bit more positive. I'm gonna go through some of the moments I actually did enjoy from Michonne's final episode. Before we even get to like a specific scene, I did like the idea of how one decision can change a person's story and how they incorporated that with Michonne and her decision not to save Andrea. And also, I love the concept that they explored in this episode, which we've talked about a lot in the past, which is, what if we started the story with Negan? What if Negan was the hero of the story? So that concept I loved that they explored. Again, some of the hallucinations and some of the footage was questionable, but the concept I enjoyed. The other thing that I absolutely enjoyed was some of Michonne's dialogue from the lineup scene. Some of the footage, like I said, I wasn't a fan of, but some of the dialogue I absolutely loved. And this goes back to my previous point, which was about the concept of what if Negan was the hero of the story? And what if Rick and his group were the evil ones? The moment where Daryl shoots Michonne, I loved that. And FYI, that was also a brand new scene that they shot. This wasn't something where they used old footage. They actually shot that again. Danai Gurira and Norman Reedus shot those scenes. Obviously, the scene with Rick shooting Michonne, that was questionable, like I said, because of digitally altering it and all of that. If they actually had Andrew Lincoln come back and film that scene, I would have loved it, but they didn't do that. Last part is those two moments where Michonne finds Rick's boots and where she finds the phone with the carving on it. Those two single moments I loved. Not necessarily everything leading up to the moment and everything afterwards, but the single moments I did enjoy. But with all of that said, this was a pretty long video. I hope I didn't bore too many of you, but I want to know everyone's thoughts and opinions. Which exit was better, Rick's exit or Michonne's exit? Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section below. That's it for this video. See you next time for another super video.